the Cerebral Entertainment Podcast.
Move that because that's going to make noise. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to yet another riveting edition of the Cerebral Entertainment Podcast. I am James, and with me, as always, is my good friend Colt.
Absolutely.
And with us today on the line, we have Mr. David Johnston of Team Warrior Within. How you doing today, David?
I'm doing really good, James. How you doing?
I'm doing just fine. We are very pleased to have you on today, taking some time out of your schedule to speak with us. Like Colt mentioned, he's been following you around for quite some time, and I have been more recently, and we're very intrigued by what you're doing out there in the world of bodybuilding, gym-wise, fitness-wise, coaching-wise, and so looking forward to the conversation, man. But if you could give our listeners a little insight into who David Johnston is, if you could just give us a little bio, we'll go from there.
Oh, that's a loaded question. I guess as is relevant for this show and this listenership, I started getting into personal training in the bodybuilding world really in 2003. Just worked in box gyms for several years, slowly built my skill sets and with that a reputation. And by the time 2010 had rolled around, I went independent. My name continued to grow. I relocated from Chicago, which is where I'm originally from and grew up, from Chicago out to the Baltimore area in 2008 with my then wife, Nikki Johnston. We were both personal trainers for a box gym, and stayed at the box gym through 2010, went independent. My rep continued to grow. My business continued to grow. Starting to dabble a little bit with helping people prep for competition. I did my first competition in 2007, so about 4 years after I first started training. I competed naturally for the first couple of years because it's what the pros said you're supposed to do, build a foundation. I said, all right, well, they know what they're talking about. I'm going to heed that advice. So I ended up competing 3 times naturally in 07, 08, and then went independent in 2010 and started training at a gym in Columbia, Maryland called Coliseum Gym, which when I walked into, it was kind of a ghost town, but it ended up being just an amazing opportunity because it was at this perfect pivot point where they're kind of ready to go out of business. And I had such a client overload. I was like, look, just let me in and do my thing and it'll work. It'll be great. And the owner, Tim Gallagher, did that. And sure enough, it was great. It was gangbusters where it just kind of started to slowly explode. And, my business got progressively crazier and busier. When my wife had her daughter in 2009, she stepped down from training for several years. So it was kind of put on my shoulders just to carry the torch and support us and build the business. And eventually, I continued to compete, in 2010. Did my first enhanced shows. Never had great genetics, but was slowly becoming a better bodybuilder and making serious progress. And you know the story. And one of the highlights. And then really by like 2013, I changed the name of my training company from David Johnston Training over to Team Warrior Within. Believe it or not, in part just because I was nervous that my name, I always had a little bit of controversy or antagonism with various people in the area. And I was afraid of judges not liking me and stuff like that. So I changed it to a neutral name. In part, because other trainees that I was training at this point wanted me to mentor them and kind of become a part of my business. So I said, all right, well, let's make it an inclusive name where everyone can train under this umbrella. And it's not just my name on the flagship. So, but my LLC and all that is still David Johnston Training. And 2013, I was friends with Adam McVeigh, who's a bodybuilder and a personal trainer who lives in the Chicago area. We had been trainers together at the same box gym in Chicago. So we retained contact throughout these years. And, I helped him prep for a show in 2013, which he won his class and did very well. And then he got the idea. He wanted to start doing a podcast, a bodybuilding focused podcast. And I think it was end of 2013. I didn't know anything about it. At first, I kind of scoffed at the idea. He wanted me to help him co-host it. And I didn't really know anything about it, and I was so busy with my business, which was doing well. It was pretty successful, but I was already kind of at a point of overwhelm. And I told him no originally, and then he said, "Look, all you gotta do is show up each week. I'll do the rest. Just show up to record 2, 3 hours a week." I said, "All right, well, that sounds like it could be fun. Let's try it." So I started co-hosting Geared Up with Adam, and we always had a third co-host. A couple different people over the years: Chris Genkinger, Dave Smith, Phil Viz was on for a while. Santiago Aragon, who's an IFBB Pro Classic competitor, was on for a while. And that just grew. And I never stayed in the mix of it to really track the reach that it had and stuff like that. I really kind of let Adam just do that because it was his baby and I had my own baby, and I was just kind of happy to be a part of it. But it was never like I probably could have leveraged it to like make money and have endorsements, but I just didn't. I didn't care. I was too busy just training people. But by 2014, I started working with Matt Porter, rest in peace, great prep coach from the Washington, Oregon area. Had a really successful season competing in 14. And then, I was just prepping more and more and more people. My company was growing through 15, 16. And then 2016, like the stars aligned, all of us decided we were going to compete at the same time. Me, Adam, Dave Smith. It seemed like everybody was all, coming to this nexus that was kind of interesting. But as the years had gone, like my business has gotten kind of out of control, and it was just slowly killing me. You know what I mean? So I ended up not completing my competition season that year, which I planned on it being my final run, but I ended up doing one show. Wasn't a 100% conditioning, like wasn't where I wanted to be, but good enough to win my class, and then kind of rode off into the sunset. And with that, I ducked out of Geared Up for a couple reasons, stopped doing that, and played with my personal training business. I was doing more online coaching by this point. And eventually, mid 2017, my family and I relocated up to Providence, Rhode Island. I continued doing the online coaching thing for a while. Was just struggling for a variety of reasons, not enjoying it. So I kind of ducked out of that for a while. And, over the last year and a half, I've continued to coach a small amount, but I've literally done zero advertising, zero networking. No, I mean, nothing in 5 years, really, since 2016. So the only clients I've had have been people that just reached out at random, like, "Hey, I'd like some help. We worked together before and it worked well. Can you help me out?" So I'd take them on, but I wasn't trying to actively do it as a business anymore. And so just recently, having gone through a variety of mental health issues, kind of crawling out of my cave, and just trying to reconnect with people that were really important to me in my life, and mostly through my business, former clients, friends, stuff like that. And that's why I'm back on social media a little bit, just kind of reaching out and seeing what the response is and seeing where it goes. So
You got it.
There you go. That's the overview.
It sounds like that you were a victim of your own success in some ways. You talk about being overwhelmed and how the business was just going out of control. Usually with that kind of growth, that's what we're looking for, right? We're looking for that kind of growth, that kind of expansion. You want to stay busy because that means something's popping, you're doing well. But being a victim of your own success, like you said, that becomes overwhelming to the point to where you got to let go to some degree. And I was just curious, were you at the time, aware of the stress that was compounding on you, or did it just kind of come to fruition at some point and bam, like a train hitting you out of nowhere?
No, it was progressive over the years.
Yeah.
I had written emails to my wife going back to 2010, telling her like, "Look, I can't do this anymore. I feel like I'm dying. And for me personally, like, I personally think it's somewhat pathological with me. Has to do with certain tendencies that I have. Some people drink, some people use heroin. I'm kind of naturally geared to be a workaholic, and I've been that way, all through my entire adult life. Like I realized I haven't worked under a 60-hour week since I was 17. So there was, literally years on end where I was working 90, 100-hour weeks. I would sleep every second day. I typically ran on 3 to 4 hours sleep, and all of this while trying to compete, while trying to build my physique, while on high amounts, while on gear. and it wasn't months. I mean, it was year after year after year after year. So with that, there were a couple phases in that stretch where I had kind of like depressive crashes. The problem is I never reached out for help. I never sought professional help. Just kind of tried to figure it out and deal with it and regroup and recharge. But the problem is it would end up leading back down the same path, but even worse. You know what I mean? And then on top of that, like I have no formal business training. I grew up pretty poor. We were definitely the poorest family in our neighborhood. Always had food on the table, but always constant stress about like money and, paying bills and stuff like that, watching my parents fight about it. So I think some of it is when I started to have a taste of success, financially specifically, there was this mentality of if there's an opportunity, take it, like don't turn down. I saw a lot of personal trainers around me where they'd be like, no, I'm booked, I can't fit you in. And I was like, are you fucking kidding me? Like, that's crazy. So I always found ways to just take on whatever was out there. And again, to a bad degree, I viewed it as a virtue, at the time. But to the point where even going back all the way to 2009, probably, like when I trained clients in person, I trained 2 people an hour. I never trained 1 person an hour. I did tandem training. And so I would book myself 2 people an hour for 10 to 12 hours straight, no breaks. I mean, find time to take a piss would be hard. Then it got to the point where, and that was, 6 days a week. And then, with that, like I couldn't fit more clients in. So I started having people ask for help that I didn't feel needed. They'd see me get ready for a show and see the shape I'd get in and be like, wow, I need your help, blah, blah, blah. And I say, well, you know how to lift. Like, you just need help with your diet and supplements and all that stuff. You need programming. So I started taking on online clients back in like, as far as like 2011, I want to say, before it was like a thing.
Yeah, right.
before like social media turned everybody into a coach. And but again, I was aware there's dudes out there. There's Chad Nichols, there's Chris Aceto. By no means am I trying to put myself on that level, but there's dudes out there who work with clients at a distance, right? They get people in shape at a distance. So find a way to do that. So then I started stacking that on top of the in-person clients. I'd be running to the bathroom, like answering emails in between sets with my in-person clients. And then when, certain people wanted to mentor under me, I was like, all right, so at our peak, I had 21 other trainers that were part of Team Warrior Within, and, trying to feed them leads and then doing all of the social media, like advertise the actual business side of the business, not just servicing the business, but running the business. Yeah. So it was a shit show, man. And I blame no one but myself, because I never had the ability or capacity during all that to like just stop and say, okay, what's the end game? Like, where are you going with this? How do you want to live? How do you want to feel? I kind of rode on it as a high, almost like a manic high, for just years and years and years. And because of that, like when I started finally in 2018 or 19, when I finally reached out for professional help and they were trying to like figure out what was wrong with me, my psychiatrists were leaning towards, they thought I was bipolar, because I would describe, my work ethic and, the hours that I kept and the hours I slept. And they'd be like, how long have you been like this? Because that's one of the defining features, of bipolar, whether it's bipolar 1 or bipolar 2, is like, how long are you manic versus your crashes? And I'd tell them, I'd be like, I've been like this for decades, like literally 30 years, my whole life. And they'd be like, well, that's not possible. And I'm like, no, like the doctors didn't believe how little sleep I ran on, and that I flourished, and that I was okay physically. And, they thought that I was lying almost. And I'm like, nope, this is the way it is.
Wow.
So
yeah.
How much have you dealt with bipolar?
Quite a bit.
Yeah.
And it by the way that you're describing that, you had a lot of manic phases, even just it still amazes me how you were doing all of that and still training like for competition. It's like the lack of sleep in that's what really probably why they were really leaning toward bipolar disorder. Now, was that an official diagnosis for you? Was that what you carried with you? And did you medicate according to that diagnosis?
So the psychiatrist I was working with, we got to the point where like I definitely was dealing with major depressive disorder. Like,
Mhm.
so let's put that on the table.
Sure.
I was definitely dealing with some anxiety issues. So let's put that on the table, and some sleep issues. So let's put that on the table. But yeah, I think she did give me an official diagnosis of bipolar, and they put me on medication for it, which was Lamo. I forget the name of it,
Okay.
and it seemed to help for like a couple days, and then it didn't help. And when I get interested in something, I become kind of obsessive about understanding it, learning it. And my entire life, I've always kind of known there was something wrong with me. Um, I came from a somewhat abusive household. I saw patterns with my father and his personality, my brother and his personality, myself, and I started to realize, okay, this is a cyclical thing that you're dealing with. Like you've had a couple of these things in your life where you've kind of crashed and had to regroup, and it kind of keeps occurring. So, and this time it's a big deal because the problem was I had doubled down so much for so many years on my efforts to just keep running
Mhm.
that by the time I crashed, I was really dug deep. Like it
Yeah.
took a lot. It took a lot to dig out of it. So my obsession during this time really became understanding psychology. Like, believe it or not, my bachelor's degree is in philosophy. I think some people know that. And I got into philosophy when I was like 15 years old, in part because I read some books, and it started to give me some answers as to why things were as they were. And I've always had that underlying sense of something is wrong with me. I want to figure it out. So I went into philosophy. And unfortunately, like, I wish I would have gone into psychology, because like I probably could have pieced things together decades prior, but it is what it is. So yeah, when I started to piece things together and they gave me the bipolar diagnosis, sure enough, I started reading, because I also at this point, like, I had no faith in therapy. So I didn't seek out therapy, but I had some, with my bodybuilding background, I had faith in hard drugs at least. And so I was
Sure.
like, all right, I'll go to a psychiatrist, at least get medicated, so on and so forth. So I was reading more on brain chemistry, and, because I was having a lot of like weird physical effects as well. Like I was starting to, display some of the effects that people have after they have like post-traumatic stress disorder. Like I
Mhm.
would go to the movies with my daughter and watch a movie, and I would just start like trembling during like emotional scenes, having like body trembling and uncontrollable like weeping, stuff like that. And so I knew there was bigger stuff going on, and I really dove into it head first. And once they gave me the bipolar diagnosis, I was like, all right, great, like let's run with this. And I didn't have any problems with it or stigma. I didn't give a shit. Like I just wanted answers.
Right.
But as I started the meds and as I read more, like it became evident to me that this was not correct. Like this was
Mhm.
not what I was dealing with. Um, so I had to tease it out, and watching more YouTube rabbit hole videos and stuff like that led me to learn more about personality disorders,
Mhm.
and how it's a more enduring, lifelong condition. And I got fixated on, okay, well, this is likely what you're dealing with. And now let's understand this, wrap your brain around it, narrow it down, etc. Went back to my psychiatrist, told her as much, and she said, okay, well, I'm a psychiatrist. And just so, James, you're the expert on this, so I don't want to step on your toes. Feel free to cut me off and give your explanation.
No,
But
no,
as I
you're always your own best expert, always.
all
So,
right, but as I understand it, for anyone who's interested in listening, with a personality disorder, it's basically as you are younger, while you are younger, due to your environment, due
mhm.
to your household, due to whatever, as your brain is in its more developmental phases, you end up developing mechanisms for dealing with the world, for interacting with the world, defense mechanisms, adaptations, if you will. And it kind of ends up having a semi-permanent or permanent effect on your brain development, which is why they won't even diagnose somebody with a personality disorder until they're, I believe, in their 20s, or at least through adolescence, because during adolescence there's still so much change going on hormonally with somebody, and people's personalities will naturally fluctuate throughout these years, right? But once you get to adulthood, if you have kind of these recurring themes and patterns, that's when they'll be a little more comfortable giving that diagnosis. And essentially, I explain it to people like this. If you take a infant and deprive them of certain nutrients, right, their bones won't develop properly. And even later in life, if you give them proper nutrients and exercise and all that, it might allow them to get along okay, but they'll always be inclined to have that bone problem. That will be their kind of natural, what they fall back towards. And a personality disorder is similar, at least that seems to be the common thinking these days, research wise, that your brain ends up developing in a manner where it has certain maladaptations for dealing with the world. And there's kind of no going back, if you will. You're always going to be inclined towards those maladaptations. And so when you're dealing with that, it isn't treated with medication. It's not like major depressive disorder. You can't just take meds to get out of a personality disorder. Usually, depending on the one that you're dealing with, it's treated with combination of talk therapy and, learning how to manage it so that the maladaptations don't take over and run you. And so you don't keep doing the same shit that's hurtful to yourself. Right. So it's about becoming self-aware and, dealing with it. So anyways, when I went to my psychiatrist and told her this was what I was thinking, she looked at me and said, well, I'm a psychiatrist, so I don't diagnose personality disorders because I only deal in hard drugs. And these aren't, dealt with hard drugs. I can still help you with the other stuff that's going on with the depression, with the sleep issues, which were comorbid and which you need to, get a handle on. But she said, I have no problem accepting that you're right. Like, I think you're right. She's like, I can't officially put that label on you. And that's the other thing too, in the psych world. It seems most people that I've interacted with don't want to put a diagnosis of a personality disorder unless they really have to, because it's very stigmatized. It's, a lifelong thing. And, a lot of therapists won't work with certain people that have certain personality disorders. Yeah, it's a whole ball of wax. So
if I could jump in for a second, David,
yeah,
I'm kind of curious about, because you say personality disorders, there are several different personality disorders. Some come with a more of an unspecified diagnosis. You'll have personality disorders unspecified. Awesome octopus mug, by the way. I dig that a lot.
Thank you. My daughter gave me that for Christmas.
Yeah, that's sweet. The one I'm more familiar with, and it sounds like kind of what you were alluding to earlier when you were describing. You're very well versed, by the way. That was and the analogy with the bones and the nutrients was spot on. The one I'm more familiar with is borderline personality disorder, which is when a child adolescent doesn't get the validation from their primary caregiver, and therefore they're always seeking that validation through different maladaptive ways throughout life. But then there's also antisocial personality disorder, which is another very common one that ends up being with, just about everyone who ends up going to jail, prison, and they're diagnosed with something, they're going to have antisocial personality disorder. I was just wondering if there was something that either you were diagnosed with or you were self-diagnosed with as far as personality disorders go.
So at this point, I didn't have an official diagnosis, but I thought I sought out a therapist because I personally, I'd read, at least at this time, there was 9 personality disorders broken into 3 clusters, right? A, B, and C.
Right.
And I seem to be a very traditional B cluster. The symptoms I was displaying seemed like, and there's a lot of comorbidities, a lot of similarities from one personality disorder to the next, because we only have certain ways of dealing with the world and interacting with the world. So people tend to, develop defense mechanisms that cross over from one to the next. So it's hard to tease out which one do you best click off for, right? So I clicked off a lot of the symptoms for borderline, but reading, I clicked off even more of the symptoms for narcissistic.
Interesting.
But here was the rub. While reading, the general consensus everywhere on the internet was that if you have narcissistic personality disorder, you won't know that you have narcissistic personality disorder because a narcissist can never admit and know that they're a narcissist.
Yeah.
Which is complete bullshit. You have to do some dig. There's communities out there like on Reddit and stuff like that there are self-aware narcissists. It usually takes having a major life collapse to where, because when you're a narcissist, everything's perfect. You're perfect. There's no flaws, right? When that becomes totally not the case, when everything falls apart, you have this window of opportunity to be
moment
like,
of clarity.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's called narcissistic collapse, where life's falling apart, and you can, for the first time, see, all right, maybe something else is going on here. So anyways, I sought out a therapist who kind of specialized in borderline personality disorder and started doing my thing with him. Now, during this time, I was still in a pretty depressive state. I wasn't working like a maniac. I'd gotten rid of all my clientele. I was just trying to because I felt for a long time like I was going to die, once it hit. Once we moved up to Rhode Island, now we were working from home. So I was isolated and I didn't have the community that I had built and all this stuff. So we moved up here in part to try to give me like some relief, thinking it would get me away from this stressful situation. And it just like got so much worse. It straight up threw me into a dark hole and accelerated things. And of course, I kept trying to train 100 clients, kept trying, like it was stupid. So anyways, I sought this therapist, and because the literature out there said you can't be a narcissist if you think you're a narcissist, I was like, okay, I'll accept that, I guess. Like, I don't want to pretend I know more than all of science, and this seems to be the consensus, so I'll run with it. And I started getting treated talk therapy wise for borderline personality disorder, because I clicked off a lot of those as well. There's a lot of similarities between borderline and narcissism in terms of how you respond and how you react. And because I was at this kind of low point in life, I was kind of displaying more of the borderline ones. But, I think with borderline, there's 9 symptoms that they look at. And to be diagnosed, you have to click off like 4 or 5 of them, I want to say.
Something like that.
Something like that. And narcissism is the same thing. There's 9 criteria, and to be diagnosed, you have to have 5 of them as enduring tendencies throughout the course of your life. So with borderline, I clicked off like 5 out of the 9. With narcissism, I clicked off like 9 out of the 9. But I ran with the idea, fine, I don't have narcissism. And as I slowly started to heal from the depression, and I was doing some DBT group therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy with the group and all this, and it was challenging for me because the other people in the group definitely were borderline, and I definitely was not. Like, I knew I wasn't. And so I started kind of arguing with my therapist slowly about this, because he didn't want to, concede that I had narcissism. And I literally went home, and one of the criteria for narcissism is you have like ongoing fantasies of infinite power, wealth, et cetera, et cetera. So I went home and I found a notebook that I had had when I was like 12 years old, where I had been drawing hypermuscular figures, and like I literally had penned out fantasies, from when I was younger. So I brought it in and I'm like, how about this? Like, I was trying to make my case, and for the record, like for listeners, being diagnosed with narcissism is about as bad as it gets. It's in the mental health world, it's really stigmatized. Therapists don't want to touch you, in part because the consensus is that it can't be treated. It can't be fixed. And because narcissists tend to be very abusive, mean, shitty people.
And they lack insight, right? They don't have insight into the fact that they have something going on. And so that's very difficult to work with.
Well, and the other thing too is that narcissists are what are called egocentric, meaning some people don't like who they are. Narcissists fucking love who they are. Like, they like it. You know what I mean? It's great. It's great to be who I am. So why would I change? And someone like that isn't going to get much out of therapy.
Right.
So
when you
were
were trying to prove that you were this narcissist, like what were you doing anything on your own to try to help yourself at all? Or were you hoping that, okay, if I can get them to believe that I am, then we can, start rolling on this?
Well, so I was still taking, I was on a certain amount of psych meds for depression and anxiety. And I even went to the point where I went to my psychiatrist, because I see her like once a month, and it was starting to work and get me out of this hole. At first, I actually had to, like, traditional SSRIs for depression didn't work. I started to realize like I didn't just have a serotonin issue, I had like a noradrenaline issue. You know what I mean? Like there was an actual physical depression just from years of like depleting myself. So the only psych drug that really addresses noradrenaline and dopamine is Wellbutrin. And because it's an NDRI, a noradrenaline dopamine reuptake inhibitor. And I had taken it in college to help quit smoking cigarettes and had a really bad allergic reaction to it. So like I was like, oh shit, what do I do? So I went to my psych and we said, well, let's try it slowly to trade it up. And it worked. And I could feel like physically I started getting a little better, but I still had major depressive issues. So then we switched over to a traditional SSRI. But I got to the point where my psych after several months where I said, how do you feel? And this might be crazy, but how do you feel about putting me on a real mild antipsychotic just to help me? I don't want to be drooling. I don't want to be, out of my mind, just low, but just to help, is there anything that'll just take my edge off and just help me feel calmer? And she said, no, I think it's a good idea. Let's experiment. So I actually got put on a very low dose of Risperdal. I think typically, for most psychotic cases, that's dosed at like around 8 milligrams a day. I started out with a 0.5 milligram once a day, and then and it felt good. And that's why I went back to her. I said, can we take it up to a 0.5 milligram twice a day, and then ultimately a 0.5 milligram 3 times a day, which I would take like every 4 hours. And what it did was it just kind of took the edge off of a lot of the rumination, racing thoughts, anxiety, so that I could start to do some of the work that was necessary to address narcissism in terms of like meditation, in terms of working on mindfulness, the stuff that they usually want you to work on when you're dealing with psychiatrists. But the problem is if you feel all keyed up, it's very challenging to do that work. So I started using the psych drugs kind of as a stepping stone, a gateway to allow me to do that stuff. But as for, dealing with narcissism, I didn't really know how to deal with it. There isn't a lot of clinical research out there on how to deal with it. There's not many clinicians out there that have written on how to deal with it. I actually sought out, there's a guy named Craig Melkin, who's a real famous author on the subject. He's in the Boston area, set up an appointment with him, paid ungodly money just to talk to him. And, you only get so much out of like one appointment. At this point, I was looking more for confirmation than anything. And psychiatrists, psychologists, they don't want to pigeonhole you because it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. If you believe that you're this, then you're this. But at the same time, I was losing everything. My wife was ready to leave me. I lost my business. My life was falling apart. And it became really important for me to have some sort of understanding of what was going on, some sort of label, if you will, just to make sure that as I kind of regrouped and rebuilt my life, I didn't start going down the same fucking path again. I wanted to know what was up, what is going on that kind of really explains this, so you can, as you redevelop yourself, do it in a healthy way. So I was, so I got to the point with my therapist. He was still trying not to diagnose me, etc. He had no problem with me being borderline, but he didn't want to put the narcissist label on me. So I finally, at one of the DBT sessions, I went in there. I was like, all right, because I was all calm and quiet and reflective. And I went in there, bear in mind, I'm in this very post-traumatic, depressive kind of state. And he's like, how do you feel? I'm like, you want to know how I feel? I think you're a fucking idiot. I think these people are all fucking losers that can't tie their own shoes. I don't understand for the life of me how anyone lives this way. And I think this is a waste of my fucking time. And I know more about psychology than you do. And yeah, that's how I feel. And he was like, whoa. I'm like, so you want to see narcissism? Here we go, motherfucker. Like,
so now were these true thoughts? Like you really thought all that stuff, or you were just doing this just to prove a point?
That's a good question. There were true inclinations, meaning like how I interact with the world. That's how I would tend to think in settings like that. I wouldn't say that I do anymore. At the time, I was really empathetic towards the other people in the group, because when you're struggling really bad and you see other people struggling, it opens up your heart. Your heart goes out. And bear in mind, at this point, even though I had a lot of psych issues, like I was still doing okay with money. I had a nice house in the suburbs. I pulled up to my psychology sessions in a Cadillac Escalade. I had a beautiful daughter at home who was healthy. So I had a lot in my life. And you're in this group with other people that might be like almost homeless, having a hard time like nailing down a job, a variety of issues. And so my heart really did go out to them. But at the same time, I think that I've had a lifelong tendency to almost like rank people, if you will, which is a narcissistic thing to do. And, I knew when I was in there that I had a degree of togetherness that a lot of these other people didn't. I knew even with my psychologist, like I had studied the subject enough at this point that I kind of did know more than he did about it. And that's not, I'm trying not to be arrogant with that. I just became really obsessive with understanding it because it's a very complicated disorder as well. Like there's layers and it's super weird, layers and layers and layers to it about having a true self and a false self, and the core emotions that fuel it and run it versus the surface emotions of how it expresses itself. And that's part of the reason no one really knows how to treat it. You know what I mean? Because it's just very complex. But yeah, I think it's safe to say those were true thoughts, in the moment.
I've worked with what I would consider a true narcissist, and I was working with that person in a residential setting. So therefore I had a lot of time with this person. It wasn't like you get an hour session and then I'll see you next week. I can only imagine trying to work with someone on that within that context. That would be very, very difficult, which is why it is so hard to treat. The only thing I could find was empathy and patience, and just being patient with that person, trying to help them to get along the best way that they could with their mindset, and just slowly try to integrate some of that empathy within them as well. And just modeling, doing that by example. That was, but once again, that's in a residential setting. So, I mean, it's a lot of work to try to unwind the I guess the symptoms, if you will, of that kind of mindset.
Well, and so I got to the point, where I was out of the depression, everything was fine, but I had given up all my clientele and I wasn't really working at all. So I was pretty much just sitting out around all day, meditating, reading. I knew my divorce was coming up and eventually we were going to lose our house, but I had no idea what I wanted to do for a living. And I wasn't proactively trying to do anything about it. In part because for the first time in my life ever, I got this sense of calmness where I just felt kind of calm, and it was glorious. I just kind of had to ride it out and not worry about anything for a little while. And, with that, as therapy progressed, it got to the point where my therapist was eventually like, look, I don't think you need to come in anymore because your life is fine. You're in charge. You got a handle on your issues and you're not having any problems. And I was kind of running out of money. So I was being mindful of, I don't want to do this forever if I don't have to. So, we cut off therapy, and at the same time, bear in mind, I had no real stressors during this period. So it's easy to not have issues to talk about when there's nothing going on in your life. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So basically I got to a point where it kind of felt like ego death. You know what I mean? I stopped train. I kept trying to train and live the bodybuilding lifestyle and even stay on gear after I moved up to Rhode Island. And once I started sinking into the depression, I just started hating it more, resenting it more. It just got worse and worse. Try to force myself through it because my whole identity was tied to it. My business was tied to it. I knew nothing else. And it just got darker and darker to the point where I was starting to hope that I would get injured so I would have an excuse to stop going to the gym. And I fought that for probably a year. And eventually I was like, you know what, dude, this is not good for you. Just fucking stop. It'll be okay. It doesn't, just stop. And when you feel like doing it again, it'll be there waiting for you. You know what I mean? So with that, I came off all gear. I actually went on HRT for a while, legit doctor prescribed, just because I made a charge at trying to be, legitimately healthy and regulated, putting everything in other people's hands rather than trying to do it myself, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. and a lot of bodybuilders, when they talk about like, I'm on HRT, well, it's self-administered. HRT for most bodybuilders means I'm doing 1 cc a week of tests that I bought on a black market, right? Yes.
Yeah.
Sure.
So I was doing legitimate, like, doctor prescribed HRT, watching my levels,
Mhm.
trying to do everything by the books so that I wouldn't let myself run the ship for the first time. And anyways, so yeah, once I got to this point where like I was in this calm, reflective state, etc., like I stopped doing therapy, didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. But everything was okay. And then most, end of 2019, I knew I had to get a real job. Didn't have a lot of life skills. I spent my whole life as a personal trainer. I didn't feel like I could do that at this point because there was still a lot of like trauma associated with it, and I felt like fraud because I wasn't really living the lifestyle myself. You know what I mean? And I didn't want to try to rebuild what I had because just the idea of it just turned me off. I had sunk so much effort into it for so many years. I was like, dude, I don't want to rebuild shit. So I just got a job doing sales for New England Tractor Trailer Training School, which was signing people up to go to truck driving school, and did all right at it, but it was really boring. Like, first job I've ever had where I actually had to like dress up and all that. And it was one of my only real life skills was sales, having been a trainer as long as I was. So they liked me there, but I didn't enjoy the gig. So a couple months into it, I started like kind of envying the guys that I was actually signing up to go to truck driving school. I was like, I think I want to do that instead because I come from blue collar factory. My dad was or blue collar household. My dad was a garbage truck driver. I always had blue collar like factory jobs as a furniture mover, stuff like that before I became a personal trainer. So I was like, all right, let me get my semi truck license, which I did. I went to truck driving school during spring of 2020, got my license, started driving over the road for a company in like June, doing flatbed semi truck, 6 weeks of training, 3 weeks in the classroom, 3 weeks with an experienced driver, and then you're on your own. And I would leave out like midnight, Sunday night, Monday morning, and then I would get home at the end of the week, either late Friday night or early Saturday morning, have a day and a half with my daughter, go out and do it again. And at first I enjoyed it a lot because I'd kind of gotten to this mindset specifically with the narcissism thing of, okay, well, if you have this, you're toxic and you should probably just try not to interact with people because you're naturally going to be inclined to hurt people. And so just, isolate yourself, live in the truck, do your thing, enjoy your time with your daughter on the weekend, and do that till you die and you'll be fine. Put yourself in a cage.
Yes.
You know what I mean? And that was kind of my thinking. I was scared of myself, if that makes sense. I was
Sure.
scared that I was a weapon that could be easily used and misused. So, because over the years, like with my training company and whatnot, I had a really big personality and I was very ragey and, mean to some people, cruel to some people for sure, definitely cruel to my wife. Just I knew that just argumentative more than anything. And I didn't want that. I didn't want to expose other people to that, et cetera. So I did the trucking thing. And at first it was cool. But then, like, as the months passed, it just kind of got like worse and worse. I could feel I was off all the psych meds at this point, not doing therapy. And I could feel like the anxiety starting to creep back in. And then some of the depression starting to creep back in. And part of it was because, like, on the weekends, I would get home and have such a good time with my daughter. It was so much stress relief. And then knowing that I had to go out and like live in this cold, stinky truck and eat cold cans of soup, and the anxiety of having to drive a fucking semi truck through like downtown Philadelphia, just sorry.
And isolated. You were isolated in that
It was
box
isolated. And I imagine even like a normal person that doesn't struggle with anxiety,
Mm-hmm.
it's just an anxiety inducing gig, you know what I mean? Like timelines and deadlines and calculating all that.
Sure.
So anyways, by like November of 2020, it was just getting worse and worse. And I was starting to struggle with it more and more and talking to my parents about it. And they're like, dude, it's not worth it. Just quit. Like, you don't have to do this to yourself. You'll be okay. So eventually I did. I said, all right, well, I can't go through this again. I can't let something suck me down a path that's going to cause me to have these mental health issues, et cetera. And I started realizing some more things about my pathology, one of which is that everything I've done in my life, in school it was philosophy, and I wanted to be a philosophy teacher, then with bodybuilding and training, and now with trucking, was something where it required everything all the time out of me. Meaning, like, when I majored in philosophy, it wasn't good enough for me to just get good grades. No, I had to understand all of philosophy, like better than any philosophy professor ever. Now,
Mhm.
that allowed me to graduate with a 398 summa cum laude, departmental like distinction, you name it, top, it allowed me a lot of success. But it was just super driven, beyond driven, which was actually the name of the podcast I did for a little while, Beyond Driven. Everything in my life has been driven, 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 driven. And then the bodybuilding thing was the same thing, for 15 years. It was not just my career, but it was also my hobby, my passion, my interest, everyone that I connected with. It was through that, so I lived, breathed, sleep, whatever. It's all I did. And I realized to be successful in trucking, it kind of has to be the same thing. That's just the nature of the industry. And I realized, for the first time in my life, like, I don't want that. I don't want something where it just defines every waking moment of my life. I want a job where it's just a job and you can go home and, do shit that normal people do, like relax a little bit, watch some TV, take a bath, whatever. So I got out of that. And, but, I was pretty frazzled because I didn't know what I was going to do to support myself, and I was stressing about money. I went from the years with my training company, like, we're making gobs of money, more money than I knew what to do with. And, after my divorce and all that, like, I'm pretty broke. I'm living in the worst section of Providence, an apartment. I love my apartment, but it's a terrible neighborhood. And luckily, like, I live on the cheap. Like, I'm not a needy person, so I get by just fine. But at the same time, like, I inherited a lot of credit card debt from our divorce and stuff that I got to slowly work through. And so I was stressing a little bit. And I just kind of realized, like, I went home to visit this is November 2020, went home to visit my family in Chicago, and just kind of did some reflecting and realized, like, okay, with this narcissism thing, you got to a state of neutrality, at least, where you became self-aware and exploded your ego in certain ways, which, that was part of the reason too. Like, I had to stop training. I actually had to be okay with letting my body just become normal again. And there was some pain with that at first, for sure. But I kind of had to, like, see how I would cope. Like, I had to test myself to just have a dad bod and be okay with it, and, like, know that my daughter still loves, she likes it better. Like, she, like, if I eat clean, she's like, no, don't diet, because to her it's associated with not having fun.
Right.
She wants to have a dad. She wants to have fun.
Right.
So I really kind of, like, did this ego explosion as thoroughly as I could, like, physically, mentally, emotionally. So I realized when I went home this past fall that I'd hit the state of neutrality, if you will, but that wasn't really enough because I hadn't built anything positive, if that makes sense. Like, I didn't know what to do with myself. So I just started kind of brainstorming. And again, there's not a lot of literature out there on what to do with a narcissist. As you, James, said, it's mostly like just managing your bad reactions to people. Like, that's usually the best hope. But, narcissism, I'm assuming that's what I have, because I still never got an official diagnosis. But I'm a firm believer in Occam's razor. Occam's razor.
Right.
The simplest explanation that explains the majority of the features is likely the correct one. So, for all practical purposes, I'm just running with it because it seems to explain things. So with that, I had to realize, okay, well, what are the deficits that a narcissist has, in terms of empathy, in terms of gratitude, and psychological. In the psych world, it's generally the running theory these days seems to be, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that when you're young, you develop a true self or a stable self, which is, assuming you grow up in a healthy family relationship, you have this underlying feeling of it's okay. Even if times are stressful, you'll be okay. Even if there's periods where you're sad, it's okay. You'll get through it. You'll live, right? A narcissist supposedly never develops that true self. All right. And with that, they end up developing a false self, which is this veneer they put up for the world of invincibility, right? Super strength, super intelligence, super success, unflawed, you know. And with that, there's no vulnerability, there's no authenticity. Everything is kind of fake, you know what I mean? To protect them from the underlying issues that fuel them. And the underlying issues that fuel them tend to be guilt, shame, fear, um, inferiority. There's one other, I forget what it is. So it was starting to, say, okay, well, what are the underlying issues that are fueling this? You know what I mean? What explains this drivenness that you have? Is it a fear thing? Is it an anxiety thing? How do you deal with that? How are you mindful about that, etc.? So these last couple months, I've just been throwing myself into trying to figure out my own therapy, if that makes sense. When you look at borderline personality disorder, as James talked about, for a long time in the psych world, therapists hate it. They wouldn't deal with it. They wouldn't touch it because there was no effective therapy for it.
Right.
And there's a lady, I'm sure you know, named Marsha Lanahan,
Mm-hmm.
who came out with what's known as dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. And everyone's like, to treat borderline. And everyone's like, wow, this is brilliant. How'd you come up with this? And she said, well, I came up with it because I myself have borderline personality disorder and there was no effective solutions for it. So I had to figure out, how do I deal with it? And
yeah, on that note, of
Yeah.
kind of alluding to something that you were talking about earlier too, Marcia developed DBT as kind of a derivative from CBT, because
Yep.
CBT is all the rage, still is. It's my personal approach, my primary approach. But her point was that if you're dealing with these overwhelming emotions, like if you can't sit still long enough, or deal with any kind of the lack of drama for borderline, or whatever, any kind of overwhelming emotions you're dealing with, if you can't do that, then you're not going to be able to do the assignments in CBT. You're not going to be able to delve into what CBT is all about, because you have to come to grips with what's going on in with your emotions first. And so it was a very poignant approach that she brought out, and it's, I'm glad you mentioned DBT. It's a very interesting approach to dealing with those things.
Yeah, and I mean, I kind of think of it as like Buddhism light, it's and so during this time, like, I even read a lot more about Buddhism, and just what is ego, and even in the brain, how the different patterns of the physical apparatus of the brain, how the different patterns work in terms of like the executive system, the executive network in the brain and stuff like that.
And mindfulness being one of the 4 skills of DBT too, as well, right? You have your 4 core skills, mindfulness being one of those,
right,
which is derived from, of course, Eastern philosophy, Buddhism, as you mentioned. Mm-hmm.
Right. But yeah, I feel by no means do I want to I feel it's narcissistic to even say this, but I feel like similar to probably how Marsha Lanahan felt, where there isn't an effective system for dealing with this, and I'm just kind of left on my own to figure it out. And who knows, maybe I will figure it out. Quite a new therapeutic approach. But
my question was coming on those lines, because it sounds like that's exactly what because who else is going to figure out how to treat narcissism other than someone who experiences, possibly at least narcissistic personality disorder.
Well, and it's crazy too, because if you get on the internet and you start searching, and I invite any listener who's interested to test this on their own, search out, treatment for narcissism, and you will just get millions of responses on how to treat the victims of narcissistic abuse.
Right.
But there's nothing, literally nothing, on how to treat narcissism itself. There's a couple therapists on YouTube who specialize in personality disorders that kind of have some leads. Daniel Fox is a big one. I ordered his book. It's like a workbook that you can work on and get some leads on it. But again, I think it's really, you have to look at what are the deficits that a narcissist tends to have, in terms of empathy, in terms of security, and a stable sense of self, and the calmness that comes with that. And then do what you can to try to build those things. It remains to be seen how much you can do that once you're older, meaning like once your brain has the structure and development that it has, can you turn these into enduring things? The psych literature seems to say no. It seems to say like you're always going to be pre-inclined or inclined to kind of return to certain personality features. So for me, I'm in the early stages of it, but just really trying to work on daily practices with gratitude, reading on vulnerability, reading on empathy. And that was one of the reasons. So that's, the main motivation why I've gotten back on social media as of late. It was twofold, and I want to be totally transparent about it. I'm still at a point where I'm pretty broke and I don't know what I want to do for a living. And over the last couple of years, I've still kept a very small number of online clients that I work with, only about 10 to 12. And, to be blunt, it's a fairly easy way to make money. It's certainly easier than driving a semi truck. And I just kind of came to the realization in the last couple months, like, you know what, you're good at this and people want you to do it and there's a market for it. And even if you're not really living the lifestyle yourself, how much does that matter? Like
if you have the knowledge, you have the
Right,
knowledge,
yeah.
right?
Mhm.
right, and just kind of dealing with some of the shame that I had associated with that, because all the years
Sure.
as a bodybuilder and a trainer, I personally, I would look at a trainer who was kind of overweight and I'd be really dismissive, like, who's this
Yeah.
fucking poser, who's this phony ass motherfucker that doesn't live the lifestyle? And I even wrote a blog to that effect at one point called The Bald Barber. You never go to a bald barber because they have no respect for your hair. You never go to a fat trainer because they have no respect for the lifestyle.
Uh-huh.
But again, I was like, you know what? I don't care. Like I'm gonna just put my services out there and not aggressively try to grow it, but just kind of see where it goes. If I pick up a couple clients, that's great. If I don't, oh well. It's not
Is your
gonna.
drive still there for it?
What do you mean by that? Unpack your question a little more.
No, I mean just like, beyond driven. That's always been basically your mantra. I mean, is that
Yep.
still there for this, or is this just something that's just gonna hold you until the next thing you decide that you want to move on to?
Yes and no. I'm hesitant to answer that question really simply because I think I give a false impression. My drive to help people and to help people be their best at whatever they choose to do, whether it's competing or just everyday fitness, is still there. And that was part of it too. So one of the things that I did when I started doing the self-reflecting a couple months ago was I said, all right, you're neutral now, but you literally have been kind of in a box for 5 years. You've hardly talked to anybody. You haven't made any connections. I told myself, make a list of all the people in your life who matter to you or have mattered to you. And I just sat down and wrote out a list. And at first, it was difficult to come up with like 20 names, which included like my parents, my daughter, my ex-wife. I think in part because my brain was kind of foggy, from years of depression and living in shame and isolation and stuff like that. But then I was like, all right, just reach out to a person and just see how they're doing. Just be really authentic. No motives. Don't worry about selling them coaching. Don't worry about their fitness. Inquire about it. Have some authentic curiosity about it. But talk to them about them and see how they're doing. Don't call them up, because that's the other thing too. I think when you deal with a lot of mental health issues, like, you don't want to talk to people because everyone's first question is like, how's it going? Well, it's going pretty fucking bad. Like everything's falling apart. I'm ashamed all the time. My life sucks, blah, blah, blah. So and alcoholics go through this, like everybody goes through this. It's common. And so just kind of breaking the cycle with that. And once I talked to one person, like it reminded me of a couple other people, and I started adding to the list every day, and I keep that list running now. And I'm 6 weeks into it, I think, and it's got over 300 names on it. When at first I had a hard time coming up with 20 names.
Nice.
And most of those people are people that were somehow associated through my training business, or that I prepped, or were clients. But with the vast majority of people that I worked with over the years, I had some really personal relationships with most of them. There, of course, were many that I didn't, where I was just a hired gun and we just never got to that point of sharing, I guess. But, with me and my coaching, I think in part because like I really built my business mostly through in-person training and then later just did the online thing. There was always a greater degree of like personal connection. You know, the environment that we built at Coliseum Gym in Baltimore, like you'll see people posting teamwork. Then it was crazy. There was a crazy amount of camaraderie. You would go in on Sunday mornings when we hosted the free posing clinic. It got to the point where we would have 70 cars in the parking lot worth people waiting to come in and pose, you know, and afterwards they would all stay and train. And you go in on Sunday mornings, we called it church because you'd be going to church on Sunday morning. You'd get in there and turn on the rock and roll, and there'd be 20, 30 fucking people all prepping for shows who were like technically competing against each other, but they were helping each other. They were spotting each other, and they were like getting together afterwards to go out for coffee. And, you know, we really built this like family that was just incredible, you know, something that I always needed my whole life. And I had just kind of walked away from it. So in reaching back out to people, you know, don't get me wrong, like I'm not going to rebuild that, rekindle that. I have no intentions to go back there and do all that again, but just reconnecting with so many of those people and checking in on them and seeing how they're doing. So that was part of the, you know, again, I said, all right, well, you have these social media platforms. They're not huge, but they're moderate sized. Use them, you know, like go on and post something. And when you're done, get the fuck off of it. Don't spend all day on it. Like I don't have them even as apps on my phone. I just have them on my PC so that I can't be constantly checking and updating because, you know, if I decide to rebuild my coaching business, I don't want it to be a driven thing. And that's where I was dancing around your question. Am I driven to still help people as I used to? Yes. Because I derive a great sense of satisfaction from that, a great sense of joy, helping other people achieve their goals. I think these days I'll be a little more well-rounded, which might make me a worse coach, to be honest. I don't really know. You know, be a bodybuilding coach, like specifically with contest prep, it's about telling someone to ignore everything their body's telling them, like ignore your emotions, ignore the exhaustion, ignore the hunger, ignore what you'd rather be doing and just be a machine. And the more you can be a machine, probably the better you're going to do at competing. You know what I mean? It's just kind of the nature of the sport. And don't get me wrong, like if I work with somebody who is embracing that and wants to run with it, fuck yeah, let's do it. I don't care. That's fine. Like I'm not going to ever try to persuade somebody. I'm not against the sport. I'm not against the lifestyle. Like I just don't want to live it personally right now, and to each their own. So if I have competitors, I have a guy right now, he's a fucking freak. He's like 5'9", 286 lean.
Jeez.
and he's never competed, and so he's going to make his debut this year. And he's one of those guys, he doesn't want to compete until he's like ready to make a run in the pro card. So we're going to unleash hell and fury with him this year and see what we can do. And you know, I'm super excited about that. We're already planning, you know, 10 months in advance what our approach is going to be, what our cycles are going to be, all that. But at the same time, I have, you know, I really cut my teeth as a trainer, just working with everyday people, you know, fat loss clients. And I got good at taking everyday people and making them look like they could compete if they wanted to. And that's how I slowly started working with competitors. I never made a conscious decision like, I want to work with competitors. That's what I want to do. That wasn't the point. It happened very organically. And to that end, I still love working with everyday people that have no desire to step on a stage. They just want to feel better about themselves, drop some weight, get their eating under control, whatever the case might be. So I'm still driven to help people. It feels great. You know, I really enjoy it. I probably sink too much effort into it rather than, you know, like any of my clients will tell you, the responses they get are very long and thorough. And, you know, we try to really, because I'm personally driven, I think, by a certain inferiority of making sure I overperform. Mm-hmm. So with that as a coach and as a trainer, I think I've always overdone what I provide rather than underdone it.
Right.
You'll never hear a client of mine complain that like, yeah, he just, you know, didn't give a real response. No, you'll get more than you wanted. but I'm not driven to build it into a business. I'm curious to see if it turns into a business. I want it to, and again, there might come a point where if I get to a certain client base and I'm making a certain amount of money, I might get to a point where I say, okay, I'm gonna make a conscious run at this, where I do some more targeted advertising, maybe try to build my following in a more orchestrated way, whether it's with podcasting. What I don't know, I don't really know, but I'm nowhere near that. I'm just in the very early stages of, like I said, picking up a few former clients and having fun with it and feeling really good about it. Yeah, and the main thing was just trying to reestablish that connection with people. So
Interesting. Have you ever considered the notion, as it occurred to me, that you owe a lot of your insight, which if in fact, once again, if you are, as you say, narcissistic and do have that particular personality disorder, you consider that your insight is due to some of the other more uncomfortable symptoms that you had of depression, of things of that nature? Because if not for those uncomfortable feelings, you would have never probably had the inkling to have the insight in the first place. So that's
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
That's very interesting.
I think, from what I've seen and what I've read, the only way a narcissist really gets to any point of, so typically if a narcissist seeks out treatment, it's because something else is going wrong.
Right. Like that collapse that you talked about earlier, right?
It's usually because they have some major depression, substance abuse issues. Their wife is leaving them and says, if you don't seek help, I'm going to leave. It's always for something like that. No one goes in and says, gee, I think I'm a narcissist, so I need to address that. Because again, being a narcissist, it feels good. It doesn't.
But do they, at that point, do they lean toward the understanding that they have the narcissistic side of things, or do they just focus on the depressive, the experiential crisis, whatever's going on?
Yeah, I don't really know enough to be able to answer that.
Right.
It seems there's a community on Reddit that I found where there are many supposedly self-aware narcissists that actually know they have the disorder and stuff like that. And that's the only real resource that I've found. So it's the only thing that I can speak from. And with that, from what I've gathered, you kind of have to, number one, have this collapse where shit just falls off the rails. If you look at the disorder, what seems to be the case in a lot of situations is, as somebody with narcissistic personality disorder gets older, a lot of the time when they're younger, they're really successful. And in fact, being really successful reinforces being narcissistic.
Right.
So it's a self-perpetuating thing. But having the disorder gives you certain skill sets to cope with reality that can springboard you towards great success in certain ways. However, it also creates maladaptive issues, so that you're going to have tendencies towards being abusive towards people or argumentative towards people, having an attitude of entitlement, stuff like that. And what tends to happen as you age is you have problems. You lose a job, you lose a wife, you have falling outs with friends and stuff like that. And so as the years pass and the decades pass, you start going from this position of being pretty successful to life kind of sucking. And a lot of time that's what's referred to as the grandiosity gap. Right. The grandiosity gap is the gap between your self-image, I'm perfect and everything is fucking awesome, and reality. Because now there's this big gulf between how you think of yourself and what's really going on. And that starts to create tension and an ability for some self-awareness, possibly. Now, at that point, again, it seems by the literature, most narcissists, they just double down on their narcissism, and they say, it's the world. It's not me, it's the world. The world is fucked up. Other people are stupid. No one understands me and my brilliance, which again, I kind of was inclined towards that for a long time, which is why I didn't seek out therapy and stuff like that. My thinking was, I'm very smart, I'm very successful, yada, yada, yada. Why the hell would I need therapy? And I was afraid that it would change me. And it did change me, but I was afraid it would change me, and I didn't want to be changed. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I thought I liked who I was, if that
Mhm.
makes sense.
Sure.
So yeah, I think for a narcissist to get to that point, like there needs to be a certain amount of collapse that allows their mask to fall long enough where they see, I don't really like who I am, you know? Shit is uncomfortable. Shit is not good. Like it might be good on some level, but on a deeper level, I'm not happy. I'm anxious. I'm uncomfortable, etc. And it seems, at least for me in my case, but from the little bit I've seen it with other individuals, it seems that you just have to have a major life event, a major life collapse, losing your business, going to jail, losing your wife, something like that, you
Mhm.
know,
Sure.
before you can have, hitting a true rock bottom. Um, before you have the ability to even start questioning things. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? Because when everything's good, like why would you question it? It's
Right.
it's great.
Right.
If it's not broke, don't fix it. How's your
Yeah,
sleep now? Do you?
pretty good.
Yeah, has it been that way for a while? Because I'm still curious about how you were able to perform and get that much work done with
Mhm.
so little sleep, especially with the concepts of lifting full time, training full time, and also using gear.
Yep.
That's just, that's no wonder you were narcissistic because that's pretty much superhuman. And so
Well,
I can see why the psychiatrist would lean that way toward a bipolar disorder back then, because honestly, that's pretty superhuman. Like I said, I don't know how else to describe
well,
it except for manic.
so as I mentioned, my dad was a garbage truck driver, and with that, he typically woke up at 3 in the morning every
Mm,
day, and he normally wouldn't go to bed till like 11 at night. So he kind of always ran on like 4 hours sleep. So I
okay.
just kind of I kind of just modeled that very young, and
Okay.
just kind of did it,
And I
and
understand the
then
drive too, your drive to get so
right,
much done, because and that was part of being narcissistic as
yeah,
well, is wanting to do everything perfect and wanting to be everything that you could be. That's why
right,
you study as much as you do about every single thing that you want to know about, because like you
right,
said, you wanted to know more than the philosophy teachers did.
yep,
So you studied more than they did, and so I understand that drive definitely perpetuated it. But just on the physical level, I just
yep.
that's unbelievable, man.
Well, so I kind of modeled my patterns off, I think, my father's from a pretty young age. And then the thing is, once I got to college, I saw that I could like utilize it. I could leverage it. I could get more
Sure.
shit done because I required less recovery and less sleep. And I was like, oh, this is great. So I kind of enshrined it. And then, all the years as a trainer, just it got, more and more pronounced, running on less and less. So when I was working with my psychiatrist, she had me on a regular SSRI because, dealing with the depression was paramount. It was number one thing at that point.
Absolutely.
And then she's like, all right, I want to put you on a second antidepressant that is going to be mostly geared towards helping with sleep. We started working on sleep hygiene. So I started taking amitriptyline at a low dose.
Mm,
And, I was doing other over the counter supplements like Calm and GABA. And I was also prescribed a certain amount of gabapentin, which would help a little bit.
hmm
And so we had a cocktail that kind of started forcing me to get better sleep. And I got to the point, where I was getting a good restful 7 to 8 hours a night. And, it was great. Like I said, I came off all my meds about a year and a half ago. And since then, for the most part, like once I was trucking, it fucked everything up again because you there's all these laws in the trucking industry that regulate how many hours you can work a day, how many hours you can drive a day, and the loads need to be there at specified times and all this. So there
hmm
was times when like I wanted to start at 1 in the morning. You know what I mean? So I'd be trying to go to sleep at like 3 in the afternoon, and you're sleeping on this really uncomfortable, you know, foam mattress in a truck. So like I got to the point where I was having a hard time getting like a solid 4 to 5 hours while doing that. But since quitting that again back home, I try to make myself go to bed by midnight and I get up at 6 every day. So I shoot for a solid 6 hours. It's hard for me to do that because, and it's interesting, I have a former client who is actually a licensed hypnotherapist. So we did a free session yesterday over Skype and just started and we didn't actually do any hypnotherapy, but we just started working on like I don't know if you're familiar with like NLP therapy, neuro-linguistic programming, and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, she does a lot of that stuff. A lot of my tendencies are, I don't know if you want to call it like nervous energy, but this wiring towards not being able to be calm and still. And because of that, I have like these deep-seated I resent having to sleep.
Yeah.
I resent having to take the time to make food. Like I hate, it's like if it was up to me, all the years as a bodybuilder, like that was the greatest relief when I stopped competing, was like, thank God I don't have to eat 6 meals a day anymore, because I fucking hated taking the time to do it. I've never been a mindful eater. Like I just wolf it down. I don't care about the taste. It's just, as long as my belly's full, I'm good to go. So like, yeah, if it was up to me, same thing. If I could literally never eat again, that'd be optimal. If I could never shower again, that would be optimal, because I hate taking the time to do the things, the self-care things that I have to do.
Yeah.
So with that, like I literally every night before I go to bed now, one of the things that I'm doing is I write an email to myself kind of with my agenda for the next day, and I just itemize it like number 1, wake up 6 o'clock. Number 2, go to the bathroom, brush your teeth. Number 3, take your supplements. Number 4, meditate 30 minutes. Number 5, read this book for 30 minutes. And just to kind of hold myself accountable and make sure I'm doing the things that I need to be doing to not fall back towards natural inclinations that are unhealthy. And hopefully eventually I'll get to the point where I don't even need to like do that list, but it's not like it's a big deal. It's not like it's a chore. It's just an easy way to keep tabs on my behavior. So but yeah, like my natural tendency, it's still like I try to go to bed by midnight, but then I usually like watch a show while I'm in bed, and I still tend to a lot of time only get like 5.5 hours, and it's hard for me to embrace it, because again, I'm off all my meds, and I just don't enjoy having to sleep, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
But it's a lot better than it ever was, for sure.
Good. Good. Very, very interesting path, David. We could do another show for sure. So I'd love to reconnect on some of the things, like you mentioned meditation several times. We could unpack DBT more, a lot of different things. I'd like to know how things, progress with your business. But before we let you go, I definitely want to steer everybody toward your social media. I've been tracking your Facebook page for a bit now, and one of the things that I really, really admire about it is because it's not this happy-go-lucky, completely just motivating. It's like, at least classically motivated, like go out there and get them. As a matter of fact, I saw a post the other day that was about how, and I'm paraphrasing here, gonna paraphrase pretty messily probably, but the gist of it was that people say that you could do anything in life, and that's basically bullshit. I mean, you have a certain set of talents that you're given. Use those, build those up, but if you think that you can just go out there and do whatever you want just because go get them, it's just not right. It's just not accurate, and a lot of people fall on their face. And I think the words that you said was they spend their whole life trying to achieve this goal, basically on false premises, right? It's on a false precept that you can be anything that you want, and that's just not true, and people need to come to grips with what they can be and what they are good at, and then polish those skills, be the best that you can be. Don't be the best that guy can be, and so that kind of post, I mean, that's what I'm looking for out there in social media, because I don't think we have enough of it, well, and not to brag on anybody else, but for me, that's what I like to see.
My favorite one that I put out was the one I did the other day, where I put a picture of me and my ex-wife Nikki in contest shape, and I just said, am I doing this wrong, this whole social media game? Am I supposed to just post short quips with cheery success stories and things are perfect and I'm feeling great, and I'm sure my business would grow faster? Because I think a lot of people might see some of the posts I put up. Like I put one up last week, and I said that I was sad because I had to drop my daughter off and go to work, and I end up, being sad and reflective. And of course, everyone gets on there like, "It's okay, bro. You'll be fine." I'm like, guys, don't worry, like I'm all right. Like
You're right.
I'm not gonna fucking kill myself. Like I'm not depressed, I'm not really dealing with any mental health issues right now other than monitoring myself and learning to be a calmer person.
Mm-hmm.
But other than that, like I, you know, excuse me, I would say that I love my life and love my life more than probably I ever have, even though I'm poor and out of shape and, all these things, just because I've finally got some perspective and can appreciate, what I have and start to feel good about it and feel good connecting with people like I never have before and all that stuff. But yeah, people see you post something like you're sad and they have to help you. They have to fix you. They have to, instead of just saying, okay, I hear your sadness. That's understandable, etc. So yeah, I put that post up, am I doing this wrong? And it was kind of intentionally confrontational. I think a little bit, just because, getting back on social media, like I literally hadn't signed on for 5 years, and just getting back on, like, you know how it goes. It's everyone's perfect life. It's everyone's success track.
Yeah.
Or if it's, sorry, go ahead.
Oftentimes too, what I see is like people have been conditioned to say, oh bro, you okay? Because a lot of folks are out there putting the bait out there for people to hook on to. It's like, I'm going to give you just a little bit of my drama, a little passing statement that says I'm sad, that says something like that. And so they're looking for that attention. They're not trying to just be like, post something objective about something
Right.
like you were. They're actually trying to bait for some attention. So a lot of people are probably,
that's fine too. It's another form of like venting, I guess, and all that. Like everyone
it
needs
is
that.
what it is. Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, it's been fun. It's been kind of a experiment with myself, how vulnerable I can be and how authentic I can be. Because that's challenging. I think it's challenging for anybody, but once you put into a public arena, and especially in a culture like bodybuilding, which kind of breeds narcissism. It breeds this mentality of being a badass motherfucker that's impervious to natural conditions, if you will.
Yeah.
And I'm interested to see, like, I might get a lot of rejection because of it, but it's gonna be what it's gonna be, and I don't care. Those types of people I probably wouldn't have worked well with anyways. And I'd rather find a handful of people that, can connect with it and it speaks to them, and maybe they have some issues of their own, or maybe, people, I know a lot of people that competed for a while and it kind of fucked them up, like they didn't come out of it a better person, if you will.
Yeah.
So I mean, I could talk for hours on end about that, and I won't. But yeah, in terms of my social media right now, I'm only on Facebook and Instagram. Again, as things grow, I'm kicking around the idea of getting on different outlets. My daughter is addicted to TikTok, so who knows? Maybe we'll find a way to do that at some point.
So
But
is mine.
yeah,
my daughter's addicted as well. It's
I just want to see what kind of videos David Johnston comes up with for TikTok.
well, I mean, there's all kinds of TikTok videos that aren't like what our little girls watch, but my gosh.
Right. Don't worry, man. I've been working on my twerking, so we'll see.
Oh, I appreciate that.
I got the WAP dance down.
Oh wow!
Oh jeez,
can't wait to see it. Can't wait to see it.
That's a complete lie. But yeah, on Facebook or Instagram, just look up Team Warrior Within. I have personal pages on both, but at this point, I just post on the business pages because there's no point in separating the two. Team Warrior Within on both Facebook and Instagram. I think on Instagram is TWW Training. And then our website is www.teamwarriorwithin.com. If you're interested in coaching, you just reach out to me directly. My email is davidjohnstontraining@gmail.com. Happy to have a conversation with you and confident that I can help you achieve your goals. So
perfect.
Awesome.
All that information will also be in the show notes when we drop this episode, man. So like I said, we'd love to check back in with you down the road if you're willing and have the time, see how things are going and unpack some more of these topics that, we could just go on and on about.
Sure.
So good stuff, man. Appreciate you once again. Thanks for jumping on with us.
Thanks for having me. And I'll tell you what, if we do it again next time, I love talking bodybuilding too. Like I do. I still follow the sport. I'll always follow the sport, I think. But I like talking about, I think, some of the stuff that other people don't talk about in terms of, just my wacky philosophy background. I think that's what helped them geared up a little bit.
Nice.
So just even stuff in terms of like how shows are judged. All these debates, like you can't judge from pictures and stuff like that. Like that's an epistemological question. Like how do we set up judging standards that have some degree of objectivity? And like I love topics like that because you don't hear a lot of meatheads talk about it. And
Sure.
if you're gonna invest in this, like it's important stuff to think that stuff through. So anytime you guys want to chat, hey, you pick the topic and we'll go there.
Sounds very cerebral to me, man. We'll do it again sometime for sure.
Awesome. Thank you guys so much.
All right.
Thank you.
And we are out.